The judge thought it would be simple. Just another will. Until he saw the name and realized the main beneficiary wasn't a person at all. It was a bulldog with a bow tie and a secret the whole town was about to find out. The porch creaked beneath his boots, but Henry Dawson didn't seem to notice. He sat still in his old rocking chair, wrapped in the fading light of an October afternoon, the kind that came early and left the world in amber silence. Next to him, curled like a sleeping loaf of bread, was Sarge, a fat, wrinkled bulldog with a face only Henry could love. His ears twitched at the sound of distant geese flying south, but otherwise, he didn't move. Neither did Henry. They didn't need to. They'd sat like that for years. No words, just the wind and the understanding. Henry wore his old army jacket, the one that still had a few service pins clinging to it like memories that refused to fade. His hands worn, veined, and trembling slightly rested on his lap. In one of them was a folded letter. Not a letter he was reading. A letter he had written. The last one. The house behind them was simple. A single-story cottage with a tin roof that whistled in the wind and a porch light that hadn't worked since Ward. But it was home. And it had been ever since Henry left the service and never really came back. He didn't have kids. His wife, God rest her soul, had passed 30 years ago, and whatever was left of the family either drifted off or died off. That didn't bother him much. He didn't trust people anyway. Not after the war. Sarge, though, Sarge was different. Henry found him outside the VA hospital 6 years ago. The dog had been sitting under a bench in the rain. No tag, no leash, just waiting for something. Henry didn't know why he knelt down. His knees hated him for it, but he did. The bulldog waddled over and sat in his lap like it was always meant to be there. "He picked me," Henry would say later, just like that. And from that day on, the two were inseparable. Sarge was with him through the hospital visits, through the tremors and the pills and the long nights when the flashbacks came like trains through his skull. The dog never flinched. He just lay there, listening, breathing, silent, but never absent. That morning, Henry had moved slower than usual. He sat longer, coughed more, ate less. And when he looked at Sarge, he didn't smile like he usually did. He just looked. Then, he took out the letter from the drawer and reread it once more. "To whomever reads this, I've served my country. I've buried friends. I've buried my wife. I've buried every reason I ever had to keep a bank account open. Except one. His name is Sarge. He saved me when I didn't know I needed saving. And if loyalty, love, and quiet companionship are worth anything in this world, then he deserves everything I have left. Henry A. Dawson, U.S. Army, retired." He signed it with hands that trembled less than usual. Maybe because the decision was already made. He didn't just leave his money to Sarge. That would have been foolish. He left it in trust to a local animal welfare foundation with one condition: Sarge must be cared for with dignity. And the rest to go toward rescuing abandoned dogs and pairing them with veterans who'd lost their way. It wasn't about money. It was about meaning. As the sun slipped below the tree line, Henry reached down and scratched behind Sarge's ears. "You're a good boy," he whispered, voice thin like dust. "I'll see you soon." Sarge lifted his head, just slightly, then rested it back down. By morning, Henry Dawson had passed away in his sleep. They found him sitting exactly as he had been. Still, calm, a quiet expression of peace on his face. And Sarge. He was right there, still curled at his feet, still waiting, still keeping watch. No one expected the will to be read with any fanfare. The man was old, childless, forgotten. But when the attorney opened that letter and realized what it meant, who it was, for the room went quiet. And when the word got out that Henry had left everything to a dog, the world stopped laughing, because it wasn't just what he gave, it was why, and who would try to take it next. The funeral was small, a Thursday morning in late October, cold enough to see your breath, but not cold enough to stop time. The grass at Green Hill Cemetery was damp, the sky gray like it forgot how to be blue, the kind of day no one remembers until it means something. There were no big speeches, no military band, no procession of black cars, just a folded flag, a wooden box, and a bulldog in a tiny black vest, sitting silently beside it all. Sarge didn't bark, didn't whine. He just sat, staring at the casket like he knew, like he understood what was inside and who wouldn't be coming back out. 3 older men in worn uniforms stood behind the box. One used a cane. One kept his eyes closed the whole time. The third kept swallowing like something was caught in his throat. They were Henry's friends, the kind you only get once you've been through hell together and made it back breathing. It should have ended there. A quiet man, a quiet goodbye, a quiet dog. But then, the Cadillac pulled up, clean, polished, 2 days too late. Out stepped Richard Kane, late 40s, wearing a coat that cost more than Henry's truck, and sunglasses that stayed on even as the wind picked up. He didn't look at the casket, barely glanced at the dog. Instead, he walked straight to the attorney standing off to the side and said, "So, when do we talk inheritance?" Richard was Henry's second cousin on his mother's side. Barely knew the man, hadn't spoken to him in decades. But once word got out, there was an estate and rumors swirled of land, pension, and old war investments. Richard showed up like a vulture with a legal pad. The reading of the will took place the next morning. A small law office, 2nd floor, 2 rooms and a secretary named Fran who brought in bad coffee and tried not to stare. Richard sat with his arms folded, legs wide, like the money was already his. Sarge, again, sat quietly in the corner. Someone had brought his bed and set it next to a heater. He didn't move from it, except to glance at the door when it creaked open. The attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Dawson's last will and testament is brief, but unconventional." Richard grinned. "Let me guess he left it to the brave men and women of our armed forces or some nonsense." "Fine. Whatever's left, I'll handle the estate." The attorney blinked, then read, "To Sarge, my friend, my guardian, my family, I leave my home, my savings, and all my worldly possessions to ensure his care and comfort for the rest of his days. I name the Maplewood Animal Foundation as the custodian of these assets, with instructions to continue this mission for other veterans and animals in need." The room went silent. The only sound was Sarge's slow breathing. Richard stared, open-mouthed. "Wait, what? That's a dog. You're telling me he left it to a dog?" The lawyer nodded. "The estate is placed under legal trust, with the foundation appointed as administrator. Sarge is the named beneficiary." Richard's face darkened. "This is insane." He slammed his hand on the table. No judge in their right mind would uphold this. He was senile, out of touch, probably didn't even know what he was signing. And you're going to sit there and let a dog inherit $2 million. The attorney remained calm. "The documents are notarized, dated, witnessed, and I should add recorded on video." Richard's voice rose. "No, this won't stand. I'll contest this. I'll take it to court. There's no way I'm letting my blood relative's fortune go to a slobbering mutt in a bunch of charity cases." Sarge didn't look at him, but somehow it felt like he understood. And just like that, the town of Maplewood, a place known more for fall festivals and bake sales than legal drama, became the unlikely center of a courtroom showdown. People started talking, whispering, choosing sides. Was Henry crazy, or was he just heartbreakingly clear-minded? At the local diner, the waitress shook her head. Henry never talked much, but he loved that dog. Said Sarge saved him from the war inside his head. At the gas station, the owner said, that Kane guy never seen him visit. Not once. But now he shows up, talking lawsuits in the barber shop. The old men nodded. Blood doesn't mean loyalty. That dog was more family than most people will ever be. A week later, a lawsuit was filed. Kane v. The estate of Henry Dawson. The plaintiff, Richard Kane, alleging undue influence, mental incompetence, and misuse of funds. The defendant, a bulldog named Sarge, represented by the Maplewood Foundation. And though the headline might have made people laugh at first, the courtroom would leave no one laughing. The courtroom smelled like varnished wood and bad coffee. There were more people than expected. Maplewood's courthouse wasn't used to this kind of attention. Usually, it was traffic tickets, noise complaints, the occasional divorce hearing, but now there were news cameras outside, locals crowding the back rows. Even a podcast host from Denver showed up, holding a tiny microphone and whispering into his phone. At the center of it all sat a bulldog, Sarge, fat, wrinkled, and completely unaware of the legal firestorm swirling around him. He wore a small bow tie, navy blue, clipped gently to the collar of his support vest. His handler from the Maplewood Foundation sat quietly beside him, occasionally scratching his ears. He didn't seem stressed, unlike everyone else in the room. At the front table, Richard Kane looked like a man ready for war. His suit was darker than before, his jaw clenched like he was chewing gravel. Beside him sat his lawyer, a sharp, angular woman from Chicago named Evelyn Drake. She didn't smile. She didn't blink much either. Their strategy was clear. Discredit the will. Discredit Henry's mental state. Make the court believe this was the act of a lonely, confused old man, not a deliberate, thoughtful choice. "Your Honor," Drake began, voice smooth as ice, "we intend to show that Mr. Henry Dawson was not of sound mind at the time this will was executed, that he was isolated, manipulated, and perhaps tragically out of touch with reality." She glanced toward Sarge. Just a glance. While we all appreciate the emotional attachment people feel to animals, it is not legal precedent to substitute a canine for a blood heir. The judge, a heavy-set man with a salt and pepper beard named Judge Raymond Ellis, leaned back slightly. He didn't comment, just nodded and turned to the defense table. Sarge's attorney, Daniel Rourke, stood, gray suit, soft voice, local, widely respected. "Your Honor," he said, "we intend to prove not only that Mr. Dawson was of sound mind, but that this was the clearest, most coherent decision of his final years. His love for Sarge was not delusional. It was consistent, rational, and documented, and his decision to use his resources to help other veterans and dogs like Sarge is a legal use of private estate. Day 1 was mostly procedural, but then came day 2, and that's when the video was played. It flickered onto a screen brought into the courtroom an old laptop, connected by HDMI. Slightly tilted, the quality wasn't great. The lighting was uneven, but the voice was unmistakable. Henry Dawson, sitting at his kitchen table, wearing the same army jacket he wore on the porch, his hand resting on Sarge's back. He looked into the camera. "If you're watching this, I'm probably gone. That's okay. Don't feel sorry. I had a good run. Not always a peaceful one, but a meaningful one. I've had friends, lost most of them. Had a wife, lost her too. Had memories, lost a lot of those along the way. But Sarge here, he's been my constant. He didn't judge, didn't ask questions. He sat with me when I was shaking. He barked when I couldn't speak. He waited when I needed time. That dog brought me back. And when I go, I want what I have to go towards something that matters. Not golf carts and wine cellars. Not some bloodline I haven't seen since Reagan was in office. Give it to Sarge. Give it to the ones like him. That's what I want. That's my will. I hope you honor it." The room was quiet. No coughs, no chairs squeaking, just the hum of the laptop fan. Richard shifted in his seat. Drake looked down at her notes but didn't write. Even the judge seemed moved. After the video ended, the attorney from Maplewood pressed play one more time. Just the last sentence. "Give it to Sarge. Give it to the ones like him. That's what I want. That's my will." That night, the town's local news ran a headline, "A veteran's last wish not for gold, but for loyalty." And suddenly, the case wasn't just legal, it was emotional. People started showing up outside the courthouse each morning. Some brought flowers, some brought dogs. A woman who lost her son in Iraq drove 3 towns over just to sit in the back row. A Vietnam vet in a wheelchair rolled in, wearing all his medals, just to salute when the video played again on day 3. The courtroom became a kind of theater, not for drama, but for meaning. On day 4, Drake tried to push back. She brought in a psychologist who had never treated Henry, who testified about potential isolation-related decline in elderly veterans. She introduced bank statements and patterns of loneliness. She even pointed out that Henry hadn't joined a holiday meal in 5 years. But it didn't stick, because the image of that man, sitting quietly with his dog choosing something bigger than himself, was stronger than any clinical claim. And Sarge. He never moved. He never barked, never growled, just sat there, breathing, like he'd done on the porch, like he'd done beside the hospital bed, like he'd done at the funeral. And quietly, people started to believe that maybe, just maybe, Henry wasn't confused. Maybe he was the only one who saw things clearly. The 5th day of the trial began with a downpour, the kind that floods gutters and slows everything down. Rain tapped on the courthouse windows as if the outside world was leaning in, trying to listen. Inside, the seats were full again, not because it was scandalous, but because it felt important. Because this wasn't just about a dog anymore. It was about who deserves to be remembered. Richard Kane didn't sleep well the night before. His eyes were heavy, jaw tighter than usual. He'd begun to feel the pressure, the media coverage, the online comments, the sympathetic stories about Henry Dawson circulating like wildfire. But today, he came with something new: witnesses. People who claimed Henry was unwell, that he was paranoid, that he spoke to his dog more than to people. One of them was a real estate agent who had tried to buy Henry's land. He didn't trust anyone, she said on the stand. Kept saying he didn't want developers turning his home into vacation cabins. Said the dog would understand better than bankers. Richard's lawyer leaned in. So you'd say he was emotionally unstable. The woman hesitated. No. Just alone. But alone didn't mean incompetent. That was the defense's opening for the day. Daniel Rourke stood and adjusted his tie. Your Honor, today we'd like to call a few people who knew Mr. Dawson in ways that matter not by business, but by kindness. The first was a teenage girl named Haley. She stepped to the stand nervously, a small dog tattoo on her wrist. I volunteered at the shelter downtown. She said, Mr. Dawson came every Friday with Sarge. He didn't talk much, but he'd bring food, toys. He'd sit with the animals no one else wanted to touch. She wiped her nose. My brother served in Afghanistan. Came back. Different. Didn't smile for a long time. Then one day, Mr. Dawson brought Sarge to the center. Let my brother sit with him. That night was the first time I saw my brother laugh again. She looked toward the dog. That dog. That man. They changed lives, including mine. Next was an older man, mid-70s, military haircut, oxygen tank at his side. Name's Wallace, he said. I served with Henry in Vietnam. We weren't close back then, but 5 years ago, when my wife passed, I started getting these letters, typed on a typewriter. No return address. He pulled a few from a folder. Turns out it was Henry. He remembered I liked poems. He sent me one every month, with a picture of that dog. Called him his peacekeeper. Said Sarge helped him stay human. He paused, eyes wet. We talk a lot about blood, but sometimes love skips the bloodline and lands where it's needed. One by one, they came. The mailman who said Sarge always waited on the porch. The nurse at the VA who said Henry once bought dog treats for the therapy pups. The diner owner who said Henry paid for a homeless vet's meal every time he came in anonymously, through her. By the end of the morning, even Judge Ellis seemed visibly moved. He took longer than usual to call for lunch, spoke softer, looked at Sarge longer. After the recess, Evelyn Drake rose again. Let's not forget, she said to the court, this case is not about emotion. It's about legal precedent. If we allow this to stand, we invite chaos pets inheriting fortunes, animals elevated above human rights. She paced slowly. Ask yourselves if Henry Dawson had been offered companionship from his family. Would he have made the same choice? Her voice sharpened. Or was he simply a man abandoned, clinging to the only thing that stayed? Rourke stood slowly. No, counsel, he replied. He was not clinging. He was choosing. He turned toward the courtroom. When others failed him, when war shattered him, when grief emptied him, that dog filled him back up. Quietly, steadily, without demand or condition. He looked at Richard, and the irony, Your Honor, is that the only person fighting this will, the only person who wants Henry's money, is the one person who gave him nothing. Richard stood up suddenly. His voice cracked. He was my uncle. He should have left something to family. Rourke didn't flinch. He did. He said calmly, he left you a choice, to show up while he was alive. You chose not to. The courtroom was silent again. Not because of shock, but because of truth. That evening, news trucks lined the curb outside the courthouse. Reporters gave updates through umbrellas. One news anchor said, it's the most watched case in the state this week, but it's not about a bulldog. It's about legacy, and who deserves to carry it. Inside the courthouse, under dim light and rows of whispers, Judge Ellis closed his binder. "I will issue a ruling tomorrow at 9 a.m. He looked toward Sarge. "And I will consider not just the law, but the life behind it." As people stood to leave, Sarge finally rose from his bed. He gave a low snort, stretched his chubby legs, and walked calmly to the doors, head high, bow tie slightly crooked. In the back row, a woman whispered to her husband, "You know, if I die before you, I think I'd want to come back as that dog." The courthouse doors opened at exactly 8:55 a.m. The air was crisp, the kind of morning where breath fogs in the light and everything feels sharper, more awake. A small crowd had already gathered, huddled in coats and coffee cups, murmuring in anticipation. Reporters leaned into microphones. Veterans lined the sidewalk, some in uniform, some in jeans and ball caps with faded patches from long-gone wars. And right on time, Sarge arrived. He didn't walk. He rode in a quiet little wagon pulled by a Foundation volunteer, a red blanket draped over his back, and the words stitched across it read, "In memory of Henry A. Dawson." Inside, the courtroom filled fast, and when Judge Ellis entered, even the air seemed to still. He sat, adjusted his glasses, and began. "I have reviewed the testimony, the documentation, the legal precedents, and perhaps most importantly, the intent behind this case." He paused. What we witnessed in this courtroom was not a contest between wealth and inheritance, but between entitlement and loyalty, between noise and quiet love. He turned to Richard, "Mr. Kane, it is clear to this court that your connection to Mr. Dawson was, at best, incidental. You had no relationship, no involvement in his life, no effort to show care or concern." Then he turned to the Foundation representative and to Sarge. "Mr. Dawson's intent was clear, repeated, documented, rational. He chose not simply a dog, but a symbol of the one living being who remained beside him when no one else did." A beat. This court rules that the will is valid. The estate shall be administered as written. The trust for Sarge is to be honored. The remainder shall be allocated to the Maplewood Foundation, in full accordance with Mr. Dawson's wishes. A sound rippled through the room, soft gasps, a quiet clap, someone whispering, "Amen." Sarge blinked slowly. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't bark. He just looked up toward the judge like he understood or maybe just sensed something good had happened. Richard slumped in his chair. He didn't speak, didn't stand, just stared at the table in front of him like the air had gone out of the room. No money, no inheritance, no legacy, just silence. Outside, the news spread like wildfire. Veteran leaves fortune to dog court upholds. Will in emotional ruling, hero chooses loyalty over blood. Maplewood, bulldog becomes national symbol of devotion. For a moment, a quiet man from a quiet town captured the heart of a nation. Not because of drama, but because of dignity. Weeks later, a bronze statue was unveiled in Maplewood Park. It wasn't big, no speeches, no orchestra, just a small group of veterans, townsfolk, and shelter volunteers gathered around as a tarp was pulled away to reveal the image Henry Dawson seated on a bench, cap in hand, looking down at a chubby bulldog curled at his feet. On the base of the statue, etched into stone, were the words, "True loyalty needs no words." The Maplewood Foundation launched a new program called Sarge's Circle. It matched veterans with rescue dogs training, therapy, and lifelong support. Within 6 months, over 300 pairings had been made, all paid for by a man who spoke softly, lived quietly, and loved deeply. And Sarge. He lived the rest of his days at the Foundation's countryside retreat, surrounded by fields, warm beds, and the occasional cheeseburger, a tradition started by Henry and kept by the staff in his honor. Each year, on Veterans Day, Sarge would be brought to the park. He'd sit by the statue. People would pet him, take pictures, tell stories. He never seemed bothered by the attention. He just sat there, breathing, remembering. Some said Henry was crazy. Some said he was lonely. But those who knew the waitress, the shelter kids, the fellow soldiers, they said something different. They said he wasn't trying to make a statement. He was just keeping a promise. One evening, years later, an old man sat beside the statue. He had a cane, a wool coat, and a smile that held both grief and peace. He pulled something from his pocket, an envelope, yellowed and creased. He placed it at the foot of the statue and whispered, "Still keeping your word. Huh. Hank, damn proud of you." Then he reached down and scratched the head of an older bulldog, not Sarge, but one that looked awfully familiar. The dog leaned into him. The man sighed, and the sun dipped below the trees. Because in a world full of noise, sometimes the truest love doesn't shout. It sits quietly beside you, breathing the same air, and asking for nothing but presence.